So, hey guys, today we're going to go over what I think is probably the best strategy for the current meta at the time of recording. So, I'll probably be posting this after this ban list, so it might not apply afterwards, which I'm totally okay with, honestly. But right now, the most played decks are going to be, uh, right now I think it's Centurion. So I don't know, but we'll just put in like Primera to represent Centurion. And then there's like 60 card piles, so it's not necessarily always Tournament, but yeah, Tournament is played a lot as 60 card pile. So we have like, I don't know, Rhino Heart, we'll just throw that in there. And then there's sometimes branded piles as well. So throw this in, we'll just throw in, I guess, Fallen of Albaz, sure. And then there is also still a good amount of people playing Tenpai for whatever reason. I couldn't tell you why. I'll just put in 3 Hydra to kind of represent that. So these are all some of the most played decks, and then actually now that I think about it, there's also White Forest, which people like playing for some reason. But yeah, we'll just put in, I don't know, let's do 3 copies of a Stellar to kind of represent White Forest. So with all of these different decks, and I guess there's actually Yubel, but I haven't been seeing Yubel that much recently, but I mean, sure, we'll throw in Yubel, actually. Yep. Uh, Lotus, sure. So these are definitely some of the most played decks, and what do all of these decks actually share? What quality do they share in common? So the thing that they share in common is that they straight up cannot play under macro or fissure. Interesting. So with Centurion, they can somewhat play under at least a fissure, but they're not going to be too happy about it. Under macro, the majority of your cards are actually just pure suffering o'clock. So with the effect of Emblema Oath or Stand Up Centurion, you might be able to play under a macro, right? Well, no, this is the thing you can't do under macro, actually. So under macro, specifically, Stand Up Centurion is actually a completely dead card. Well, kinda, right? So the fact here sends for cost a card from your hand to the graveyard. So under a fissure, you would be unable to send any monsters and only spells and traps. Then there's also the fact that potentially you just don't have any spells or traps to send. But then under macro, you can't send anything at all, so this card does quote unquote nothing, you know? And then if we were to let's see, if we were to try to normal summon Trudea to go into Primera, Primera would still be able to technically grab a Wake Up Centurion. Then you can go Wake Up Centurion, go into Auxilla. If the Primera and well, if the Primera gets banished here, it's fine because you can set it from banished with Auxilla. So technically, if you start specifically Trudea and pretty much only Trudea, I think, as your 1-card starter, I think this is the only 1-card starter that you can play under macro. Aside from that, yeah, you're kind of cooked, but you do have a option under macro, but yeah, you're suffering. And then we'll go to White Forest because sometimes people do play White Forest with Centurion. Well, what plays do we have here? All of your cards are actually dead now. So if you were to activate Tails of the White Forest, Tails gets banished and it's no longer in the graveyard, so that means you can't search it, or I mean add it back from the graveyard with the, what's it called? The Diabella Queen of the White Forest. And also all of your White Forest cards actually send spell traps to the graveyard as cost, meaning you're essentially skill drain, pretty much. So under macro, you're suffering. If you're under fissure, you're actually also suffering because, you know, if we, well, if we do the combos for White Forest, it usually requires you to put back your White Forest synchros into the extra deck to resummon your smaller White Forest monsters, right? But yeah, that's not doable anymore because there essentially is no graveyard. So your cards can't be in the graveyard because they're all banished. Well, as far as monsters go, if that were the case, that is already pretty damaging. But not fully game losing because you would still be able to send your spells and traps to the graveyard and then set them back on field. So that much is technically doable, and you could even do this on like a toy soldier technically because it counts as like a spell trap in the back row instead of a monster. So that's a funky thing about Fissure right there. So yeah, for the most part, you're not doing good. And then Tenpai used to be fine under Fissure or Shifter, like that type of effect. But actually, right now, they're arguably no good under like a Fissure or Macro effect. So if we were to uh, go through the standard line, right? So normally the line that you would go through is like uh, we would activate, let's say, Sangan summoning to start, and let's say you can't interact with your opponent for whatever reason. Your opponent can't do jack diddly squat to you either. So if we make Sengenpai Transcendent Dragon on well in the main phase one, there's actually a huge problem. So first off, if you were to shifter with Tenpai, you can't I'm pretty sure you can't actually lethal unless the board is empty or you simply open enough engine to do so, right? But that would be like if you activate shifter and then your opponent set maxi and pass, you could lethal that like most of the time, right? Probably. But if your opponent actually had a real board and you were to try to do that same thing, it just doesn't work, right? And just as a added bonus, you can't activate a forbidden droplet under macro, so that's not something you can do. But worth mentioning here is that you might have Sangan Summoning to prevent me from activating card effects in main phase 1, and then you would normally try to go into Transcendent Dragon, right? But you can't do this anymore because you only have one copy of Chandra, and if that copy of Chandra gets banished, you just don't have any place in the battle phase anyways, so if we were to just bring a pretty much just a 3k beater into the battle phase, yeah, I'm sure that's lethal, obviously, right? So yeah, that's how Fissure can kind of clap this up, right? So if we have Sangan summoning here in this case, then the only like conceivable way, like assuming your opponent essentially has all of their monsters and then they toggle off, the only conceivable way for you to win is to bring like Hydra and Chundra or something like that to the battle phase and be able to just like Chundra attack, summon guy, and then like Hydra effect, Kaiman or something like that. Kaiman in battle phase, summon guy, and then you just like attack, make maybe I don't know, Trident, up Sangan summoning, attack for game, get lethal, question mark. Something like that might work. But yeah. Unironically, I think a set Ash Blossom Joy Spring though, because the main deck Tenpai guys, all of their attacks are so low, none of them can actually out a Ash Blossom Joy Spring. So if you were to actually go Trident, well, if you attack with Trident and then go Trident, opt specifically Sangan Summoning, that would be lethal. But if you did not have Sangan Summoning, I'm pretty sure it's not lethal. So that's just a funny. But in this case, if we banish Chundra, you actually can't access the majority of your extra deck for the rest of the duel. So you just don't have any good plays here. So the main play that most of these decks would have to go for is just hard open main decked backer removal, because the idea is that we don't just simply have macro or fissure, obviously, but we're really talking about the impact of macro and fissure on these decks. Well, the thing about potentially playing a macro or fissure is you don't actually need to care if your deck can play under it or not, because you can just simply activate these cards after you've played. So that can be pretty brutal. And then it's an automatic loss pretty much at this point if I set up like just about anything. So if I have, I don't know, we'll just say Baron yugioh with a fissure plus a macro, or just interchangeably a macro or a fissure, all of these decks would probably just lose to that, no matter what hand you opened, unless maybe you resolved potentially a maxi, just potentially. Because I can also short my play and just not give you maxi draws to hopefully draw into like backer removal, and then you just won't be able to play under fissure anyway, so you're kind of like cooked no matter what action you take. And this play is even better than you might have initially thought, because the simple way that we can beat uh like maxi as well as the most charming cards at the same time is, well, the simplest way is actually to simply drop a floodgate. So the reasoning behind this is because if you're playing the Mulcharmy cards plus Maxi, it's actually taking up a lot of main deck space, and for some reason people still want to keep to 40 cards, right? So our opponents here, there's actually a very high chance that they run only one piece of backer removal or zero. So it's between one or zero. So it's like one of Duster or absolutely nothing at all. And if we just drop a floodgate that we can play under, so it doesn't necessarily have to be macro fissure, but macro fissure just covers like everything. Like maybe if we were to activate instead a Gozen, it's not like very good against like Stellar Centurion. It's like I mean, it's like not that bad, not that good. Maybe there's also like Rivalry, Tikaboo. Depending on the exact deck we're facing, it's going to be uh, varied results if it's good or not. But I mean, Fissure is more consistent in the sense that every single one of the decks kind of here are all negatively impacted, and some immediately game losing if they don't have a way to remove the Fissure or macro. So, for example, like with uh, Branded, Mirror Jade actually sends for cost. So if we actually went second and had Dimensional Fissure and just activated it, it's just completely killer. And if we have like macro, you can no longer do the effects of like Serenir and Graveyard send Branded Fusion plus Branded Expulsion to add it to your hand. That is no longer possible. So yeah, it's pretty rough, I guess, for all the decks listed here. And I haven't really seen much Voiceless Voice, but I mean, Voiceless Voice is not that happy under macro as well, not being able to activate Saphira. And Low's Graveyard effect can't really happen because there's no graveyard. And also, you can't use the Ritual spell effect of Float under macro because it's not in the graveyard. So yeah, I guess macro for the win here, right? But yeah. If we break down every single one of these decks, essentially, though, they just can't play under certain floodgates. But right now, well, I don't think Tearlament would play it, but if you do play Mulcharmies plus the Maxi, you're not running that much backrow removal, so just getting floodgated is actually a legitimate issue that you can't really deal with anymore. So that in of itself, I think, is the reason not to play the Mulcharmy cards. I mean, at this point, I don't think people have quite caught on to this, but yeah, at this point, you're probably able to just try to put your grubby mitts around any floodgate you can. So, just for example, if it wasn't banned right now, Kaiser Coliseum would actually be insane right now, because Kaiser Coliseum is a one-sided floodgate. If you were to Maximi and I have Kaiser Coliseum up, right? All you can do is maybe you can summon one monster, and my one monster might be bigger than yours, right? So maybe the only thing you can summon is like an Stellar, so you can't actually beat over my monster, and you have no backer removal. So you're just completely checkmated here, pretty much. And then I can just OTK you next turn, even if you have a second Maxi. I wouldn't really care because you can't set up anything. It's completely just you're screwed basically, right? Well, as long as I'm going first. So that's where the toxic aspect really comes in here. So yeah, that's pretty brutal. But I mean, I'd have to check exactly what floodgates are legal and what options you have. Because Parsing Stone, honestly, it's pretty brutal. But it's not brutal enough unless you can utilize this fully, right? So maybe let's say I'm actually playing Vanquish Soul and I run 3 Parsing Stone. If we're playing specifically only for going first, because you do have to consider Tenpai, it kind of exists, but back row removal is not something Tenpai actually has good access to. So Tenpai, unironically, does not have better access to back row removal than any other deck in the game, because the the back row removal that you would play in Senpai is just main decked back row removal, which technically any deck could play, right? Like Eldlick could run that much back row removal, but they don't because no one would enjoy playing Eldlick like that. And you don't really need that much back row removal in Eldlick, and you already inherently have some with like Conk and Eldlick itself. But with something like a Tenpai and how they play, it makes sense to run like around 3 pieces of backer removal, but you know, that's only a 30% chance or so to actually open backer removal. And if I am running, let's say, 6 floodgates that are particularly nasty, and I have a pretty compact engine, like maybe, let's say, Vanquish Soul, because Vanquish Soul can be decent under a lot of floodgates. Well, not all of them, but pretty decent overall, I'd say. Uh, Under a bunch of different floodgates, like skill drain, we would be fine under. Parsing Stone is probably fine. We could manipulate Parsing Stone in pretty disgusting ways, honestly. But assuming you don't open backer removal, the game is probably immediately lost because you just won't be able to play at all. That's how powerful floodgates are, after all. So, for example, with Parsing Stone, either player can activate the effects of face-up monsters on the field. And this doesn't even affect the monsters, it affects the players. So it's also continuous, so it bypasses the field spell here. And what action can you take? So let's assume I go, I don't know, maybe we activate uh, the Rosin effect, and we activate, well, actually, no, we could do like activate Borger effect and then activate Xiaolong effect to search, and then that would trigger like Parsing Stone. And then if my opponent does not have backer removal, well, immediately in your main deck and in your hand, then you lose, right? Unless you're playing a back row deck, like, I don't know, maybe Lab or something, where you just Cephi pass it and not worry about Parsing Stone. You'd be okay, I guess, technically. But if we were playing Tenpai instead, we can no longer activate any of our extra deck monsters. We cannot activate any of our main deck monsters. And you're, in this case, I would say completely cooked, right? And then there's also like flipping certain floodgates, making your deck pretty damn unplayable. So well, maybe we go like flip Tikaboo, and your deck is essentially all dragons. I can no longer do anything as a Tenpai player in this case, unless I specifically have a Harpy's Feather Duster or some kind of backer removal. And boom, 30% chance for this to occur, you know, for you to actually be able to open something like this. And then there's a 60% chance or so, like assuming I'm running like 6 floodgates, my opponent has a 60%, well, I have a 60% chance to open more or less a floodgate, right? So that's 2 out of 3 games, and 1 out of 3 of those games, my opponent might actually have a piece of backer removal for me, which is absolutely disgusting. And I mean, the numbers get even more muddy and messed up when you throw in stuff like Solemn Judgment, or maybe like a crossout designator, or whatever, right? So yeah, floodgates are pretty disgusting for going first. And right now, there's even more of an incentive to actually just play these floodgates. I mean, people aren't doing it right now, so we should be happy about this. But the incentive is that if there are going second decks right now, right, then that means you're going first more often than normal. So we're going to assume whatever deck you're playing with these floodgates, you want to go first anyways. And let's say maybe of course, you win 50% of your coin flips, you lose 50% of your coin flips. You're normally then with that in mind, right? Most of the time, your opponents would also want to go first, except with the exception of Tenpai, right? So let's say generously that maybe Tenpai loses wins the coin flip when they don't want to against you, like a decent amount of time, and there's still a somewhat decent amount of Tenpai players. So let's say, actually, in this case, it'll be like 20% of the time that you lose the coin flip, you're still going first, right? So that means only 30% of the time you will be going second. So that makes it even more efficient to just start running these hand traps, just mathematically speaking, right? Or over hand traps, we can just run floodgates, right? And the advantage of this is also that right now, hand traps are kind of getting out of hand, and people are playing a crap ton of hand traps. And the counter to hand traps can very simply be, yeah, I'll just flip like a horrendous floodgate that I can play under, but you can't. So maybe it's like Fissure, a macro, Fire Sinkstone. It could be Skill Drain, Rivalry, Tikaboo, just all of those different like kind of floodgates, right? And then your opponent, oh, I can't play the game. GG, you know? And in this case, your opponent would be running pretty much. We might, well, as of this recording, well, as of me recording this right now, there are 3 copies of Maxi, 2 copies of Wolf Charmies. Usually that's the ratios being played. So all of those cards are just effectively dead. So if I just normal summon, set a floodgate, and then flip it over, yeah, it's curtains. GG. Not much else to say. I mean, it's not necessarily a fun way to play the game, but, you know, it is probably optimal right now, actually. I mean, I'd have to check out all the math on this, but in theory, I'm pretty sure, like, if I were to, for example, do, like, normal summon Rhino Heart, and then I go into Kick Hello, Scrap Celiac Bass, if I were to then activate, in this case, for Tearlament, this would be probably a pretty good floodgate. Neither player can add cards from the deck to their hand except by drawing them. So I can play under this perfectly, no issue, right? In fact, I also still have an interrupt, and this was only one special summon. So you would upstart at best, and then I can Celiac, the Kick Kalos, so you can't really destroy it by battle to stop me from playing next turn, assuming I actually have nothing else for whatever reason, which I mean, not that likely. We can do that. And then next turn, we also might potentially have Kick Kalos, just special summoning something from hand to send itself to the graveyard to trigger the mills, or we might have another Tearlament card to kind of trigger, just eventually, something like that, right? So yeah, deck lockdown, macro fissure, yeah, those cards right now, Power Sink Stone. Yeah, they're actually looking very viable and very strong and somewhat like worth playing. Even if our opponent runs like 1 piece of back row removal, that is 1 in 10 chance of opening back row removal in your hands, more or less, right? So it's like 10% chance, yeah. So 1 out of 10 games, we could randomly, you know, have our auto win condition not be auto win potentially. But I mean, yeah, I don't know how I feel about this. I'm not even sure if I should be posting this video or not. But the math, it just completely checks out if you consider how many cards are actually dead in your opponent's deck, right? So, like, let's see, I'm pretty sure I have some sort of list that has like a decent amount of hand traps. Let's do, I think, probably Unchained has a good amount, right? So if I were to have to be dealing with someone setting a floodgate and then passing, let's see what I actually have dead here in my list. Because the hand traps I'm running, I'm not running as much as some other people might be running, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then we could cut technically a few more, so it's like maybe around, well, we could cut these two, I guess, so 13, 14-ish hand traps. We could even run 15 if we cut like Duster. So we could also cut, I guess, like Wailing of the Unchained, putting us at like 15, 16-ish hand traps. And all of those would be dead cards. So that's like half of the deck being like pretty dead and useless because Floodgate. So, for example, if we were playing like Kashtira, it's pretty brutal, right? Where we can go like special summon Unicorn and then, or Ogre, it doesn't really matter which one we summon. But assuming our opponent's not also on Kashira, if I summon any cash monster and then I just activate a floodgate, our opponent is completely unable to play, and all of their hand traps are completely dead and do nothing now, and they're just getting pulverized by Ogre, and they will eventually just lose to having no life points because they have no plays available, right? So yeah, that's kind of how that goes, I suppose. So it could be Ogre, it could be Fenrir, it could be Unicorn, it doesn't really matter which monster we have here in this case, but we just attack our opponent over and over again, and then they'll lose, even if we don't have effects on our monsters. As long as we control a bigger guy, we'll end up winning. In this case, there's potential that you could even consider Blue Eyes. Like, if the meta develops far enough, Blue Eyes is a viable option potentially, because, you know, you can just special summon a 3k beater. And that would be bigger than some Kixteria monsters, allowing you to just potentially attack your opponent in the same way they would be attacking you, and they would have no plays under like potentially a lockdown or something. I don't know. It's just it's just dumb, really. But yeah, just with macro in particular and fissure and deck lockdown. So these 9 cards, I guess, these are particularly disgusting because, well, it depends on your exact engine size and whatnot, but, well, the thing about these cards is you don't really need to be able to play under these cards fully. So, for example, like with my Kashtira deck here, we suffer under lockdown. So I wouldn't be able to add any cards off of any of my Kashtira cards, so I can't use Unicorn effect to search, Ogre effect to search, Theosis effect to special summon. All of this would be pretty much just not doable under lockdown. But on the other side of this, I actually can just do all this before activating lockdown, and then my opponent has to play under an upgraded version of Colossus, and then I can do my full plays first. And we all know how bad Colossus can be sometimes, right? So with that menagerie of cards that we had before, with all of those like different archetypes, the only archetype I think that doesn't get screwed over by Colossus was like Centurion. Exactly, I think. Aside from Centurion, I think everything else just gets kind of cooked somewhat by Colossus. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. And yeah, honestly, just play floodgates. Yeah, it's pretty optimal right now. And I mean, things are bound to change with the release of new cards, hopefully. Yeah, I'm coping, but right now, if you can fit a floodgate into your main deck, it's actually beneficial for you because you're going first more than usual because people are enjoying playing Tenpai, I guess. But in terms of like a potentially somewhat optimal inboard, so we'll assume we can deal with Maxi at least, And then if we get Mulcharmied, it's not as bad because it's not as many draws. And then we can just slap you with a floodgate, right? So let's say we have, I don't know, Ash Blossom, called by, and then we throw in, well, I think around 6 of them probably makes sense. So we'll do macro 3, and then lockdown 3. If we do this, there's a very high chance we open this, and we still have enough room to run a fair amount of hand traps. It doesn't need to be that many, but impactful hand traps would be nice to open. Just whenever, I guess. We could run, I guess, technically Droll if we wanted, but I don't really like that too much. So I guess we'll just run Bell instead, because Bell is just still okay right now, I guess. And then we can just throw in some engine. So in this case, this might look ridiculous, but let's go with this Orchist. So we'll go 3 Nightmare, 3 Gearsu, put in all this. The extra deck, I won't fully do the extra deck. 2 of these guys, and then maybe we'll grab this, and we're probably about chilling here, right? Yeah, something like this, and then we'll throw in a couple more extra gnarly starters. So we'll do Dark Grepher, and then we could technically play like the Nightmare package, I guess, which could be fine, but it's not something you necessarily need to do. Not really required. And then we can do, let's see, what's really good here. Maybe we throw in an Omega or something. That might not be too bad. But from here, should we get one more starter? This would be like a 1-card combo, right? So I guess it'd be fine to go like Arma. And then we're probably okay from here, right? Like 2 Arma. Wouldn't bother playing the 3rd necessarily, and then we run a few more hand traps, I guess. And then we'll probably be fine. Let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So yeah, 3 more hand traps and this would be rounded out pretty well. Because we're under, well, we'll probably be under macro at some point. We should run something that can be played under macro, so we'll go with like Ghost Martyr. So we'll do a test hand, and we'll explain the combo line for this. It's pretty simple. So we're looking for a particular hand first. So okay, sure, this will do. So not necessarily the best hand. Maybe I should just put some dangers in here instead of like Armageddonite. I don't know. But let's assume we do normal summon Gearsu. We go through the entirety of this, and then we can activate Lockdown. So once we activate Lockdown here, and in fact, now that I think about it, we could technically also do this. Whoops. Verte. And then we can go like Dragoon. And then for Dragoon, we need Red Eyes Fusion. And then Red Eyes plus Dark Magician, which are actually somewhat decent targets for like Dark Grepher. I mean, we could technically make this a little bit better, but I just generally don't really care right now. So Red Eyes, Dark Magician, what would be at? I guess we could technically cut return, right? 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, actually, these are not good discards. 1, 2, 3, 5. That's like 9. It's fine. The card's kind of a brick sometimes anyway, so yeah, we don't need to run it. Okay, where's Dark Magician? Down here. Alright. So something like this would be fine, I guess. So let's find... Okay, this works. So, I mean, not necessarily the best engine for this, but just to show that's doable, we can normal summon Dark Griffer here. In fact, to send Symbol Skeleton from our hand, as well as sending, I guess Nightmare is fine. We'll send Nightmare, Nightmare, target Dark Griffer, sending Harp, Harp, special summons Girsu. Girsu is going to send the World Wand, and then we can go effect of World Wand to special summon back Nightmare. Then we can go make Galatea. Galatea grabs Field Spell. And then from here, we can go into Verte in a little bit, right? To put the Ingirsu into the graveyard. And then we can activate Verte effect to summon Dragoon. Then we essentially pass on Dragoon on field plus whatever, right? And that's kind of the idea of the combo, and we can special summon Dingirsu next turn. So next, we can just activate Deck Lockdown, set macro, pass. And then because we have particular macro here, we can go ahead and in draw phase, use Nightmare effect to send Orcus Symbol Skeleton from our deck to the graveyard here. And in fact, we did have Orcus Symbol Skeleton. We already have one in the graveyard from the start of the turn, so we could technically send something else as potentially follow-up with the Nightmare, like the World Like to See World Wand, before then later flipping over the copy of Macro. So now our opponent right now will have to contest with, in the back row, Macro Cosmos, Deck Lockdown, so it's Colossus, Macro, and in fact this is like better than Colossus because you cannot special summon from the deck either. So something like a fusion deployment would not be activatable, for example. So you're under, essentially I would argue like 3 floodgate effects here, just off of these. And then you have to deal with Dragoon, Omni Negate, and this discards the negate, right? Yeah. So we can do that. Discard Ghostmourne and Moonlight Chill. And then we have as well the Orchestrated Babel, so we can still set up follow-up, it's just not as good. So we can still special summon Dingirsu with the Symbol Skeleton in the graveyard, and if Dingirsu does get banished, we can next turn then special summon it back with World Legacy World Wand. So we can do that as well. And technically if we run Zeus, we can get rid of all these floodgates on the next turn and then do our play from this point forward, right? And we're just doing, I would say, arguably a billion times better. So yeah, that would be horrible to play against. So the amount of interactions is not that many, but floodgates auto win the game, and everything else on top of this is just very disgusting. And technically we would be able to deal with or do away with 2 to 3 back row cards with just like the Dragoon and Dingirsu as well, without even going into like an access code or anything like that yet, which we probably will maybe go into, and we probably will play like an SB, right? So maybe we link off like Dingirsu the next turn to make like SB to banish a card at the back row. We could do that, and then summon back Dingirsu with World Wand. So that's like 3 pieces of back row removal there, paired with the Dragoon, Omni Negate to prevent the whatever card our opponent has from doing anything to us, right? And even if we can't make like our flashy plays, like maybe we can't summon Girsu with like Harp Horror the next turn, that's still fine because, you know, we have like Dragoon plus Dingirsu on field. What do you have? Absolutely nothing. So yeah, that's absolutely winning. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. And hopefully this was insightful in how, you know, deck building can be pretty disgusting, I suppose. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.